going to give you a rundown on pagination and infinite scroll.
Hi guys. Cool, thanks Jen. So first off, thank you very much for coming down. It's 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Hopefully you've all had a nice beer. And I am today going to talk to you about pagination and infinite scroll. There is a bit of a backstory behind this whole presentation. I will be honest, because I had an idea and it got basically fucked over by Google. And I am just going to go through that first. But before I do, just to make sure everyone's on the same page about what I'm talking about. So pagination, the practice of dividing content across multiple pages, and then going through those pages through links. That is what I'm talking about today. And infinite scroll, similar thing, except apart from using links, you're going through divided content using scroll events. So I had the idea start of this year to do a test in the wild on some of the larger sites to find some common problems. I thought it would be an easy test. And my idea was basically just how search-friendly is content in the wild. Pagination infinite scroll in the wild. And I wanted to understand this because over the last couple of years as a consultant, I found more and more people didn't do it very well. So I did a very simple test. I don't know if you see on Twitter, but I do very simple technical SEO tests. I just took 150 of the Alexa top 500 sites, put them through deep crawl, because I work at deep crawl, and kind of simulated Googlebot. I then created a criteria analyzing the crawl data, and basically, I'll talk about the criteria later, but basically I had two camps. One was SEO-friendly pagination infinite scroll, and one was not. And I basically just created SEO-friendly and excluded. Then, like 3 weeks ago, Google just completely fucked me over, and thought, is John in? I don't think he's in. I think I saw him walk away. Good. He just just told me that it had changed. So yeah, about 21st of March, they basically announced that for some time they hadn't used rel next previous at all. And I was like, okay. Something that I chose rel next previous pagination infinite scroll because it's a cornerstone of part of a technical SEO. It's a very niche thing. It hasn't really changed in like 7 years. So for them to go, oh, we don't do that, I was like, wow. As you can imagine, this community was very mad. A lot of people were angry, to say the least. And I got into a bit of a strop a couple of days afterwards, and I was like, ooh. Because Google had basically not destroyed, but completely changed my my tests and what I was trying to do. So I kind of thought about it for after a while. I came out of my teenage phase, and I thought, well, we don't really know now about pagination without rel next previous. So I had a bit of an opportunity to ask a question, come to an idea, because everything around pagination that's been written is now completely out of date. And I was in a very unique position because I was testing things and trying to, and so I just started to go, maybe I can answer a question. How do we manage and optimize rel next previous without or post rel next previous? And what's interesting is what I came to a conclusion, what I found as I've gone through my data and researched, this is a question that we all have to answer. It's a question that isn't easy because of basically how Google now treat pagination, which is what I'm going to talk about now. So how do Google systems handle pagination is kind of the next question you have to ask yourself once you're asking, how do we handle it? So previously, Google basically, you put your rel next previous tags on your paginated pages, and what Google told you would happen was when they picked it up, they consolidate all of those paginated pages in a series to one piece of content. And it also helped the Google system choose a single individual page to rank for keywords. It's usually the first page in the series of a paginated series, but it's not always. But if you had cannibalization and pagination was being different pages in the series appearing in search, you could use rel next previous to make sure your first page or your first page in the category appeared. But actually, when Google, John did a webmaster hangout on 1 a.m. the next day, which I have no idea why I did 1 a.m. the next day. He basically said, we don't treat them any differently to any other page on your website, which I found very, very interesting, because that means now that just like any other page, paginated pages are indexed separately. They are no longer consolidated into one piece of content. So that means that just like a category page, a product page, a contact us page, all of these paginated pages are treated like those kinds of pages. Now, when I realized this in my teenage phase, I realized I also have the capabilities to handle this, because as we all handle these kinds of pages all the time. So really, you have to ask yourself, why does it matter then? Why does it matter that it treats it just like a paginated, just like any page on the website? The reason why pagination is really important is actually it's an access point. They're access points to and navigation points to deeper level pages on your website. If you don't handle them correctly, then actually you could accidentally cause big problems. And this was a good example that I found was, well, that I helped handle for a migration, was basically a client had redesigned their website, but not really thought about pagination. And they basically got rid of all their internal linking. And I don't know if you can see, but they essentially orphaned hundreds of thousands of pages that actually perform really well on their website. And this really shows that you actually need to handle the basics very, very well. Otherwise, you can accidentally kind of destroy your performance for deeper level pages. So I realized we need to go back to basics. We need to go back to basics of how to handle pagination. We need to go back to basics of crawling and indexing when thinking about it, and traditional SEO fundamentals. So that's when I updated my criteria. I say update. I got rid of Relics or previous, because the rest of the things in this list, the 4 other points, was actually always how Google told us to handle pagination. But I think we all, and this I include me in this, I think we all had a blind spot on pagination and just slapped on Relics previous and just thought that's how it worked. And I from my results, from my updated criteria, I changed. I kind of updated the data and updated the two SEO friendly and excluded results. Now, what's really interesting is I can't actually tell you everything I covered, because there's too much to talk about, and I probably don't have enough time in this 20 minutes to talk about it. But what I am going to do, oh yeah, if you're taking notes, by the way, there's a blog post which will come very soon, and I've also written a guide for everything I'm going to talk about in this session. So if you're writing notes, I've already written lots of notes. I should mention at the start. Oh well. So yeah, so if you are writing notes, guys, I've written guides, because there isn't, what I found, I don't think we need guidance, we need more written documentation, because there's actually a few things that I'm going to talk about right now that isn't really, I don't think, well known. And when you ask John, if he was here, when you ask him kind of these sorts of questions, he will answer them. So what I found was actually that 2/3 of the pagination that I tested didn't follow this basic criteria, which is disappointing in 2019, I'll be honest. But what I was also really interested to find was that actually there was a third type of development practice that divides content, similar to Infinite Scroll, except there was a lazy load kind of design, which I'm sure you've all seen if you've ever gone on like ASOS or any sort of newspaper publisher like Washington Post. But you basically click. You click on load more, and it loads the content through JavaScript. The next piece in the series, the page. So what was really interesting is actually Infinite Scroll was the least popular design. Interestingly, it was on e-commerce sites that mainly used Infinite Scroll, even though lots of UX researchers actually found that Infinite Scroll is not a great way to show content to users, because people just keep scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. It's not great for like goal-oriented tasks. And actually, pagination was the most popular. But when you take away pagination from the data set and look at Infinite Scroll and lazy load, I actually find that the number of non-search friendly designs that didn't meet the criteria jumped significantly. And actually, this is another talk in itself, and I wish I could talk about it right now, but I probably don't have time. So again, I do talk about this in my blog posts and talk about my guides, and if you have these sorts of designs on your website, I'd highly recommend you read them, because actually following the basics is probably one of the best ways you can improve those kinds of designs. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about 3 key common problems that I found with all 3 designs in my data. So the first one, link architecture or internal linking. I highly recommend that everybody in this room understand the importance of pagination in the internal link structure of your website. I'm sure that everybody here knows that the 3-click rule about pagination, about your website architecture, and making sure that your website is no more than 3 clicks away from the homepage or an important page. John has actually said that reducing click depth helps them understand important pages, which can help you improve your SEO performance. There's also the PageRank dampening factor, which basically just means that link authority kind of lessens as it goes through different pages and goes through each node. So again, I'd highly recommend you think about click depth, because pagination by definition, if Google handled them just like any other page on your website and doesn't consolidate them into one piece of content, pagination creates more click depth. And actually tested click depth across all different types of web designs, and this does include a lot of different types of websites, but I just want to emphasize the point that if you don't think about pagination, you can get quite deep, and it is 18 clicks away from the homepage for certain pieces of design. So I highly recommend thinking about it. A really good article, actually, by a guy named Matthew Henry. He's not in, is he? No? Okay. He looked at how site pagination kind of affected click depth. And I found, testing some of his designs, some of his link schemes, that actually you can reduce click depth by having different schemes on different types of on pagination, and actually just tweaking it slightly by removing 1 or 2 links in the scheme can actually increase click depth. So I'd highly recommend that you review your internal link schemes on pagination or any type of web design that divides content and think about how they can reduce click depth. I'd also highly recommend just looking at normal internal link practices, because again, that's something that I think is quite common. There's tons of SEOs that write about it. They're so much smarter than I am. And I highly recommend reading them. In my blog posts and in my guides, I've actually linked to a lot of the helpful guides that help you practically implement some really good internal linking schemes to actually reduce click depth by linking to deep level pages. And one such one, which I highly recommend reading because it actually does talk about pagination, is Richard Baxter from Built Visible. Really, really, really good article, and I learned a lot from reading it. Second is indexability. This is probably one of the most misunderstood and confusing things about pagination, because lots of people no index pagination, try and reduce index bloat. But actually what I found when I did my research and chatted to the Googlers and chatted to some other SEOs is that you should really make sure that important pages of access points to deeper level pages that help people navigate to your deeper level pages should be indexed. And the reason why that is because of how Google's indexing systems work. So I don't know if anyone knows this, but basically Google selects a canonical for every single page on your website. Regardless of whether you tell it to, that process always happens for every single page. And you can see the Google selected canonical URL in URL inspection tool in Google Search Console. But what's really interesting is the excluded URLs process, because questions to John have indicated that if your page is no indexed, is removed from the index for a very long period of time, it can actually mean that outbound signals, so like internal linking content, get dropped. So if you have a paginated page that's no indexed, and it's the only access points to deeper level pages, actually eventually Google won't see the internal links and drop them. It also drops stuff from the link graph. So any PageRank that's past those deeper level pages will also disappear. And there's no actual tools that tell you that, because that isn't really talked about that much. I'll go back. I had to dig really deep to find Patrick's chat to John. I had to dig really deep for the no index rule, because that was mentioned about 2 years ago. Something that nobody really looks into, and I think hopefully someone else will look into it. Maybe I will. So avoid using rel canonical and no index on important pages, because it can cause problems. And if you're wondering how you can possibly figure that out, there's a simple way that you can understand how reliant pages are on pagination. And that is basically doing 2 crawls. So first crawl, just crawl your entire website and look at the number of URLs that are found. Then in the second crawl, just exclude all of the paginated URLs, just paginated URLs from your crawl. And this is a really good example, the most extreme example I found in my data set of all the websites I looked at. 2/3 had just disappeared from the crawl. So this website's pages, deep level pages, heavily rely on pagination. And I'd highly recommend doing this if you're wondering how to investigate and understand your website, because that is a really important thing to understand if you're trying to no index canonicalize paginated pages. Because if they did paginate all paginated pages, they just end up removing quite a lot of internal links to these deep level pages. Finally, crawlability. Probably one of the most disappointing aspects of my tests. Basically, you should make sure that important paginated pages have unique URLs and can be discovered by crawlable links. This seems obvious, but Google can't show content, crawl, index things without URLs. And luckily, when I tested, I was like, oh, yeah, good. So 95% of people who've had pagination had unique URLs mapped to paginated pages, which was great. It's the only positive thing I actually found. But those who didn't use fragment identifiers, and fragment identifiers basically means the little hash in the URL in your browser, Google cannot see anything past that. So if you are clicking on links, and there's always a hash that appears in the browser, Google cannot see anything past that piece of content. So Google will never be able to see anything past page 1, which is a problem, for internal linking to deeper level pages. Google needs anchor links and href attributes to follow links and also pass PageRank. But, and this is really disappointing, about over half of the paginated pages that I tested didn't have crawlable links, which was, again, really disappointing in 2019, I'll be honest. But what was interesting was designs that didn't, the most common reason for this was actually the JavaScript-based websites that didn't include anchor links or href attributes. Again, very simple, but probably one of the a very important aspect of internal linking is actually having crawlable links. And the other most common thing I found was event scripts with href attributes. Basically, the developer doesn't want actually to show, wants to have an anchor link, but doesn't want to have a URL pointing to it. So you just click on that and JavaScript executes and loads new content. There's no actual URL in that. So again, you can't, Google can't crawl it. So I'm going to wrap up because I'm probably running out of time. So I've highlighted like how to optimize and manage pagination. But I'll be honest with you, I think the whole thing that my tests have found, that Google suddenly announced and we just didn't know, it's a highlight deeper level problem with the community, with us, and also with Google. Google's documentation isn't really up to date, but we also need to stop relying on Google's documentation. We need to start testing things ourselves because we need to be able to properly understand what is going on. Only through testing and through prodding John to ask him questions around what's happening have I understood more about pagination. And I'll be honest with you, I completely didn't realize it was like this complex. I thought I was doing a very easy talk. I thought I was going to do a very simple talk and skip off home and go, yeah, I've done a BrightonSEO talk. But I'll leave you with 3 things that you should probably do. So one is understand the basics of how search works. So understand how make sure URLs are mapped to paginate pages, make sure things are crawlable. If you do this, I found that you'll probably be better than 2/3 of the people who are pagination if I base it on my data set. But I really do think the basics are where you should start. And there's a lot of information out there that Google's putting out, like Martin Split, so I'd highly recommend looking into it. Think about internal linking. Internal linking is probably the biggest aspect of pagination that I didn't realise until I dug into it, that we need to start thinking about internal linking more with pagination, particularly around click depth. So I highly, and again, I've written a guide that goes well more into depth around different methodologies in the SEO world that you can probably use to help introduce click depth, so I highly recommend doing it. And finally, just test the shit out of your website, because only through testing of tons of websites in the wild have I understood that pagination is a serious problem, and understanding it has helped me understand actually how I can be better in what I'm doing. So here's a link to the guide, a guide on basically how to tackle pagination post-run lecture previous. Should be live now for 4:30. Yeah, it's live. So if you want to go read it. I highly recommend. It's based on a lot of research that I've done. It's based on chats with Googlers. So if you want to go read. I was going to post the actual results and tests that I did for this presentation, but the BrightonSEO Wi-Fi is terrible, so I couldn't finish things. So I will publish that very soon. And thank you very much.